There was a shooting in Copenhagen about a week ago, and this gunman went into a shopping centre and he shot several people. He fired into the crowd. 3 people died, 4 people were seriously injured on the Sunday afternoon. They arrested the suspect within 11 minutes.
That's quick.
Outside the Fields shopping centre. Danish police said there is no indication that this shooting at the Copenhagen shopping mall was terror-related. Interesting use of phrase there, Beryl, because there's probably quite a lot of terror involved.
I'm sure there was.
What they mean is not political. The word terror associated with terrorists is now assumed that it's some sort of political or religious motivation. That is to say, part of an organisation. So they're saying this man was acting alone. The gunman who opened fire, said the Chief Inspector Søren Thomassen, most likely acted alone and selected his victims at random. He went on to say the motive is unclear, but there's nothing to suggest terrorism. He has been arraigned on preliminary charges of murder. They describe him as a 22-year-old ethnic Dane. Interesting. By an ethnic Dane, do they mean he's Danish, but from an ethnic minority within Denmark? Or do they mean he's ethnically Danish?
He was an indigenous Dane.
Yes, I believe that is what they mean, which they said indigenous Dane instead of ethnic, because that was a bit confusing. Now, the point of saying that is, so why use that language? Well, of course, if he hadn't been, then there would have been some suggestion that his point of origin was to blame. Say he'd come from a Muslim majority country, it would be assumed by many that it was because of his Muslim faith that he committed the act.
Yes.
Of course, there's some basis in that by far the majority. I mean, it depends on who you look at because of reports being collated in different ways, what percentage, but, well over, say, 95% of terrorist attacks are by Muslims on behalf of the Muslim faith. So, just statistically speaking, you would say it would be reasonable to assume that until you find otherwise. But as we know, he's an indigenous Dane. Does that mean he's not Muslim? Well, no, because Islam is a religion, but it makes it unlikely that it's ours.
Take it we can't assume anything then if he's an indigenous Dane. Why it happened?
As to why it happened, well, there were reports that it was a man first named Noah who had posted material online seemingly showing that he's a little bit unhinged, that it's someone with mental difficulties.
Oh, so he is an activist then?
Well, that is the suggestion. No, I haven't seen the actual material and I don't think you can access it now, but that was the suggestion. Now, that being the case, it's interesting to note, isn't it, that people then referred to him as a possible white supremacist.
Right.
That's sort of another assumption. I spoke about the assumption that Islamic terrorist, white supremacist, right-wing extremist, that's what I wanted to say. And then you used to have communists, wouldn't you? That you would usually say in the terms of part of a terror cell, or a sleeper cell, being planted there by communists to come out and wreak havoc. There's all these different phrases which, to some extent, have lost their meaning because they just banded around without sticking to their original meaning. Now, let's take right-wing extremists, for example. I'm not sure that that's used in its original... I mean, I know the word right-wing goes from way back to do with French politics, but it has traditionally been used to describe people who want strong law and order in their country, strong borders, protection of the country, and then free trade and individual property rights being protected within the country.
So they are politically motivated people?
Yeah, so that's right-wing, politically motivated. For a right-wing, you would say, if you talk about equality, it would be equality of opportunity that was important. Now, left-wing, you associate with people who think equality of outcome is important. You think of communism, socialism, where the government needs to step in and take control. Government, of course, voted for by the people, so democratic in that sense. Taking control and making sure that everyone has an equal share of the pie of resources. Taking control being the important thing there. On this model, fascists, Nazis, for example, of the Second World War, would be left-wing. But people often mean when they say a right-wing extremist, they mean someone like the Nazis, who were left-wing. So it's just madness.
Yes,
I don't understand what any of these terms mean anymore.
And perhaps they all need throwing in the bin and developing new ones.
Now, what we have here is someone who seems to be having mental health problems, committing this atrocity. Is the problem really to do with evil and the human heart?
Yes. because the devil is the author of evil and it takes control of people's minds. And of course, I suppose there can be sort of medical problems like dementia and things that happen because of people's medical situations go awry. All those kind of people. I suppose we would put that under ill mental health.
Yes.
I'd like a better term than that somehow, really.
Even the term mental health has become a problem because people say, oh, I've got mental health, meaning that they have...
We've all got mental health.
Meaning that they're mentally ill, that's what they mean. But it's become a new term, which again has slid away from its moorings and no longer seems to convey the meaning that the phrase seems to say, if you just take it linguistically. So what we have here is various terms trying to explain evil. The way I see that spiritually, just, we promise in the show to give Christian comment on news and events. And just looking at this sort of event, whether it's a terrorist communist cell, whether it's a left-wing extremist, a right-wing extremist, an Islamic fundamentalist terrorist or a white supremacist, whatever it might be, it seems to me that there's the same spirit behind it. In fact, when you see these terror movements spring up across the world, it's striking to me that a particular flavour takes control for a specific time. It used to be all the terrorists were left-wing or communists, right? If you take fascism as being right-wing, but certainly different to communism, going back into the mid-20th century, all this sort of thing was right-wing to do with fascist takeover of countries. And then they're starting big wars. If you go back to the early 20th century, they were anarchists, and lately the majority are Islamic. But it seems, in the way that they behave, the way they go about things, it's the same spirit behind it.
Yes.
Satan, in other words.
Yes.
The devil is behind these various movements and seems to move between them, whichever one he can take advantage of the most.
Interesting. So would you say that people who have poor mental health...
I think that they're prey to it, yes. I think that they're prey to the influence of evil because something has weakened their mind. And we are all in that situation.
Presumably you wouldn't say, though, that Christians who succumb to poor mental health...
Well, they have an advantage in that they can call on God's help, but you're more open, I think, to evil influence, as you are to all influences, if your mind is weakened in some way.
I see.
You've lost control. Therefore, someone, a strong, or maybe a group of people with a strong code can take you over. Say, this is the way to live. Or this will give you an answer, this will give you more certainty. You see, if your mental health problem is one of having illusions of grandeur, it could take you over in that way by saying this is the way that you will be the saviour of the world. If your mental problem leaves you into low self-esteem, this is the way to build up your esteem.
Right.
This weakness of mind can result in you aligning yourself either with a political movement or religion, or with simply taking on board certain activities which will either build up your self-esteem or fulfill your own grandiose self-importance. And if you look at the behaviour of these lone gunmen and look at their motivations, there seems to be they've taken this idea from somewhere. This is one example. What on earth good did it do for him to go and shoot people?
Yeah.
It didn't actually give any benefits to him in a practical sense. In fact, it made things worse. He's now been arrested. So in his mind, there's a distortion that makes him believe that this is a good thing to do. Yes, Norma, what is your opinion on this?
I think that he as a person, yes, has a difficulty with his mental health. But people have always had difficulties with their mental health. That's one of nature's things, isn't it? But what has happened is basically we have the climate and we have the technology. The climate at the moment is a climate of violence. The world is a violent place. It didn't used to be a violent place, but the world is a violent place. And that encourages people with difficulties with mental health to actually follow suit and be violent. And then the other thing is we have the technology. The technology is twofold. One is it brings communications so that you know what is going on around the place. Go back 500 years, that person would have been living in fields in Denmark and wouldn't have known what was going on beyond the horizon. Whereas now he only has to do whatever to realise that across the world there are people of different opinions, different persuasions, doing things in a violent way and so on. And then, of course, there's the technology of warfare. 500 years ago, he might have had a stick that he could pick up and perhaps hit his neighbour with. Now he's got a high-powered rifle that can cause a lot of devastation. Or even worse, he could be in a position of power and control weaponry that can kill multiplicities of people miles away, just like that pilot who fired a missile and he was safely in the space above Russia, but he caused devastation on the ground hundreds of miles away, and a lot of people were killed. So it's a sad world. The genie's come out of the bottle. We can't put it back. We can't go back to 500 years. Perhaps in a way the devil's been unloosed. And I feel sorry for lone people, but I would say that they're not lone people because they're in a world where they're not actually alone. There are all of these influences on him. He can acquire weaponry.
Yes.
He can be aware of all of these things. So he's not alone in his field with the birds to talk to and the animals to talk to and so on. Yeah. He's in a big world, and it's sad for some people.
Yes,
it takes brave people to stand against it.
Yeah, and I think that last point you made, Norman, was the one that I was alluding to earlier, that whether or not it's officially a terrorist attack, to be a terrorist attack and be classified as such, you would have had to take on the beliefs of a particular organisation. It still is the same thing in that he's influenced from outside of his own world by something. And I agree with him. I think that it's evil in the sense that there's a spiritual evil abroad causing this to happen. Technology helps, but the same technology can also be used to stop it if you let people. And I know our American listeners will be saying, yes, if you had Second Amendment rights and could carry a gun, you could have shot him before he shot anyone else. And I know that that's the arguments both sides. But
but they might miss and cause a lot of other damage.
On the other hand, they might be well trained and hit him and stop it. So It depends on the gun culture in the country. There's arguments both sides to this, that's what I'm saying. That problem of evil, I think, is going to continue. And we talk about the devil being loose. That's one of the signs people believe of what's often called the end times.